Hello and welcome to Report Writing for Clients Part 2. My name is Carrie Meyer. I'm an accredited genealogist. For those of you who joined me for Part 1, you received some tips and tricks for writing citations and research logs. And you know that the two basic types of reports are the narrative report, which is a family history or a storytelling, and the research report, which is more academic and analytical. In Part 2, we're going to discuss the narrative report. So these are some of the basic things to get you started with a narrative report. You're going to want to make a cover page. You're going to remember that you're going to use the facts that you found during your research session to tell the story about an individual. But remember that facts are still going to need to be cited. It's also important to stick to the facts. We don't want to create a work of historical fiction, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. If you are someone who feels that you found out a lot of information about an individual while doing research as far as the important facts, the basics, who people are, but you didn't really feel like you found a story, you can use local and world history to add perspective or depth to your story. And then the last thing we're going to talk about is the use of numbering systems. So first, let's talk about the cover page. A cover page should clearly indicate who this report is about, and it should make it clear that you are the creator and author of this report. Things like photographs and catchy titles are fun, but they're not necessary. So if you're lucky enough to have located a photograph of the person that you are writing the report about, or if your client provided you a photograph, then you can use this to make your cover page more attractive. Fun titles are great, but they're not necessary. So just make sure at least the basics are covered, that it's obvious who this report is about, and that you're the author. So as I mentioned before, we're wanting to stick to the facts, and we don't want to create a work of historical fiction. It might be tempting to embellish the story, but I'd like to encourage you to resist the temptation. You can still tell a good story even if you are just sticking to the facts available to you. Now, if you're writing for your own family and you're doing your own history, you are welcome to embellish all you would like. But this class is about writing for clients, and so you really need to remain professional and stick to the facts, okay? So I made an example here of someone who's used his creative license, and it's a somewhat true story taken from facts, but also the author has used some creative license. So in this case, the research was done for the Johns family. Liam Johns is the main subject, and the client hired the researcher to write a story in the narrative format. That was their preference. So here's an example using creative license that's not really appropriate. It was a cold, dark December night in Jackson, Tennessee. William Johns anxiously walked up and down in the light, powdery snow in front of his cabin. His wife, Elizabeth, had been in labor for hours. William blew on his cold hands and silently prayed that their child would be born safely. Just as the sun began to rise, he heard the cry of a baby pierce the silence. William joyously rushed into the house to greet his exhausted but smiling wife, who proudly presented them with their seventh son, Liam. Okay, so what is wrong with this? For one thing, we can imagine that it was a cold and snowy day in Jackson, Tennessee in December, but we don't know that for sure. We don't know what time of day Liam was actually born. It may have been in the middle of the night or just at dawn, as this story kind of suggests, but it may have been at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. We have no idea what type of home the family actually lived in. And another thing to point out is that Liam was born during the Civil War. He was actually born in Jackson, Tennessee, the day a major battle was fought in that town. We don't know if his father, William, was even home or present for the birth. And lastly, we can hope that Liam the seventh son, was joyously welcomed into the family. But what if poverty or fear of the father William dying during the Civil War caused the family not to find this new baby such a welcome addition? So this is a nice story, but we don't know if all of it is true. So let's give an example, still using William and his son Liam, where you stick to the facts. By sticking to the facts, you can still tell a good story. So as I mentioned before, if you feel that there's too little of your story to tell, use local or world history to add depth to your narrative. For example, here's a different variation, a narrative based in fact. Liam Johns, the seventh son of William Johns and Elizabeth Henshaw, was born the 19th of December, 1862, in Jackson, Tennessee. That same day, the Battle of Salem Cemetery was fought between the Union and Confederate armies in Jackson, Tennessee. General Nathan Forrest of the Confederate Army wanted to destroy the railroad to stop the progress of General Ulysses S. Grant and his troops in the Union Army. Forrest attacked the Union soldiers in Jackson to distract them, while other Confederate troops destroyed railroad track both north and south of town. Citizens of the town are said to have watched the battle from the rooftops of nearby houses. It is not known exactly when Liam was born that eventful day. Perhaps the stress of the battle so close to home caused Elizabeth's labor to start, or maybe Liam had already made his entrance into the world before the battle began. Elizabeth may have listened to the sounds of battle and worried for the fate of her family and neighbors as she held newborn Liam that day. So in this, you're not just simply stating the fact that Liam was the son of William and Elizabeth, born this day and in this place. You've still got a good story going on, but you've actually used facts. It's been pulled from local history. And yes, there is still a little bit of surmising, perhaps the stress of the battle Elizabeth may have, but the difference between this and the previous example is you are pointing out that it is a possibility. You're suggesting feelings that may have taken place that day and that are likely to have happened, but you are not stating it as fact. In the previous example, you're telling the story William did. He anxiously walked up and down in the light. It was snowing. It was a powdery snow. They did live in a log cabin. So you see the difference. So in this case, you've gone off into your own imagination and pictured how it was, and then you've told the reader that that is how it was, even though you don't know that for sure. In this example, you suggest feelings that may have been felt, or emotions that may have been felt that day, or the possibility that the husband fought in the battle that was taking place in his own town, but you haven't stated it as a fact. So I just wanted to point out the difference there. So you can still tell a good story by sticking to the facts, and then make sure that you cite the facts. You need to cite the fact, where did you get the information that Liam was born this day in this place? And also, when you have gone to local or world histories to gain additional information, be able to cite the source that you used to get this information. Okay, and the last thing that we're going to talk about is choosing a numbering system. For this type of paper, you should usually use a genealogical numbering system that helps the reader kind of keep track of individuals. Now, this isn't so much necessary if you're just telling the story of one person, but if you're writing a compiled family history, the kind where not only do you tell Liam's story, but then you go on to tell his father's story, then you're going to want to be sure to use a numbering system. There are several different possibilities. Popular options include the Ananetefal, I'm not really sure how to pronounce it, sorry. It's also known as the Sousa strata notes method. The NGSQ is also a popular method. There are several varieties. You can just go to Google and type in genealogical numbering systems and it will take you there. And you can look through them all and see which one you think fits your project best, or which one you just like best. Each method is slightly different. Just be sure you stay faithful to whichever method you choose. They're all very similar. This is one example. Most of them assign a number to the person, in this case, Liam Johns, and you're going to do you'll always include genealogical facts. It's just going to be a quick summary of the facts: who that person was born to, when and where they were born, when and where they died, and who they married, and when and where. And then oftentimes the same information will be included for the spouse. After that, you will tell their life story, and then the final step will be listing the children. And you usually list the children, all the facts: birth, marriage, death, and then you cite them, but you don't actually tell the story. But if you are doing, like I said, a compiled and you are telling the stories, every person that you're going to tell their story will generally have a plus in front of it, indicating to the reader you will find this individual story included in this paper. So I hope that you found that helpful, and that you will join me for part 3 on how to write the research report. Thank you so much.